Death Stranding is the first game developed by Kojima Productions since the departure from Konami in 2015. Leaving Metal Gear Solid behind, Hideo Kojima and his team are tackling something new, and from the looks of it, rather unique. In fact, people, and Kojima himself apparently, seem to be a bit unsure about what the hell this game is even supposed to be. You take the role as Sam Porter Bridges, played by Norman Reedus, a delivery man of some sort tasked with the difficult duty to reconnect a fragmented society in a post-apocalyptic world. It is, from what I can tell, a game thematically about the bonds we make with other people, isolation, and the very human connection between life and death. But despite all the confusion about what you do in the game and what the story is all about, I think it is safe to just call it an action game focused on exploration for now. Although it does not necessarily fit all the descriptions and characteristics of what we usually would expect of the genre, it does fit the bill, for the most part. It has combat, weapons, and a huge open world to find yourself lost in. Also, you can hang out with your baby friend and take a piss in the open nature. Free as one can be. During this year's Tokyo Game Show, Hideo Kojima took to the stage to show off over 40 minutes of new gameplay. It did not necessarily explain everything people wanted to know, and most likely confuse some even more. And without a translation for a very long time, some things were, of course, inevitably lost. There are, however, things that do not need spoken words to still say very much. Some of the footage showed off the safe house where you apparently can take care of your own Norman Reedus, have him do silly faces and pose for the camera awkwardly. And it does look like fun in that weird, over-detailed Kojima Productions kind of way. And then this happened. And out of all the things that were shown at this event, these few impactful seconds are what I want to talk about. This scene was mostly laughed off as a joke by the community and quickly ignored. However, I think that there is a lot more to discuss about this punch than it would first seem. Therefore, I want to take a critical look at this scene, as well as others similar to it from previous work of Kojima Productions. So let's talk about what their catalog of games might tell us about the conscious as well as unconscious values of sexuality, heteronormativity, and agency across genders in video games. Before we begin this analysis, let's define some terms and explain more about the lens through which we will be examining this subject. Hopefully, without being too long-winded, of course. Here goes. Throughout this video, we will be loosely following the methods of critical discourse analysis. This is an approach to the study of discourse that focuses on power structures that exist within our society and how these structures establish themselves, as well as how they are upheld. In other words, very exciting stuff. It aims to put a spotlight on socio-political issues such as exploitation and inequality. So what is discourse anyway? Some would say it is simply oral and written language. However, we could go one step further and define it as a particular form of social practice. With this broader definition, discourse does not only refer to texts and talk, but also all semiotic indications such as images and signs. During the course of this video, we are going to talk about parts of video games that lack spoken dialogue. Pictures, movies, and video games may contain non-verbal communication through things like presentation, player agency, and the character's body language, which convey meaning and contribute to the text all on their own. So, although this punch does not come with any spoken words or written text, that does not mean it is not saying anything. So, why is this an important subject for analysis? Well, discourse both constitutes the social world and is constituted by other social practices. That is to say that discourse not only contributes to forming and reforming social structures, it also reflects them. So through this lens, it could therefore be said that some discursive practices actually produce and reproduce inequality. Unequal power structures between social groups like different social classes, men and women, or heterosexuals and queer people. And considering the large audience media attracts, it is fair to call it a form of mass communication, which of course in turn makes it important ground to examine. The discourse of media is not simply representational and usually carries meanings that serve to uphold the social world and these unequal structures. For example, the representation of certain groups, values, and identities unavoidably involves not only decisions about what to include, but also what to exclude. In this regard, media discourse constructs what is called an assumed audience. In the case of video games, an ideal player. The assumed audience for video games is still for the most part heterosexual cis men, which of course influence how the products portray themselves to us as players. And if you as an actual player have a lot in common with this constructed ideal player, then chances are you might just view what is presented uncritically and take it on board unconsciously. And this idea of the assumed audience goes well together with the concept of male gaze. Most of you have probably already heard about this common concept in feminist theory, but let's explain it a bit anyway. Male gaze refers to how women and the world around them are portrayed in media, such as literature, movies, and of course video games, from the perspective of heterosexual men. Through this gaze, women are depicted as instruments that are meant to serve the men consuming said media, usually in sexual ways. And just to make sure we are on the same page before we begin, this analysis is not meant to be a takedown of Hideo Kojima or his co-workers. In this video, we are not accusing them of necessarily being sexists, homophobes, or whatever it is you might come up with. It is fair to say that the interpretation of whether they are or not is up to yourself. We do not find those questions very interesting though, since these are after all issues bigger than Kojima himself. God forbid not everything would be about him. Also, we are of course not saying that sexy characters are inherently a problem. However, let's not kid ourselves. The objectification of women in media is a problem. So if you're one of those guys who are really afraid of SJW stealing your sexy characters in video games, then maybe go eat an egg or something. Which brings us to our first talking point. Let's go back in time. In June 2008, Metal Gear Solid 4 was released worldwide on the PlayStation 3 and received high critical acclaim. The game was praised for its striking visuals, supposedly near-perfect gameplay, and of course, satisfying story. The reviewer on PSX Extreme even went so far as to say that it has the most captivating story ever told. A bold statement to be sure. Ian Dransfield from the website Kikiso seemed to have been a bit more on the ball with this one when he said in his review that despite how much he loved it, there was no denying how stupid and nonsensical it all was. Because in reality, the game boasted a bonkers plot meant to tie all the serious loose ends together to varying success. Players were met by an older, grizzled Solid Snake in the not-so-distant future of 2014. The world is in chaos, controlled by war economies and nanomachines that fuel a never-ending battle across the planet. In the middle of all this, your mission is to find and stop Liquid Ocelot, a returning character pretending to be possessed by a brother who you killed all the way back in the first Metal Gear Solid, from taking over the world. As is tradition for Kojima-produced games, Metal Gear Solid 4 is of course full of Easter eggs and hidden secrets. However, there are two in particular that we want to highlight. Throughout the game, the player will find themselves in battle with the so-called Beauty and the Beast unit, or B&B unit for short. The 4 members of the unit are described as having suffered severe post-traumatic stress disorder, and that their unstable mental states have made them both unpredictable and deadly. Their mental health issues combined with their skills as soldiers have in turn been exploited to basically make them into killing machines. The exploitation of these women does not end there though. The boss battles against the B&B unit members are split into 2 phases. During the first phase, which takes up the majority of the battle, the player's opponent fights with her mechanical suit on, and during the second, she will break loose from the mechanical armor and reveal herself wearing a rather form-fitting bodysuit. If the player chooses to not neutralize their opponent for several minutes during this phase, they will find themselves in an endless white void. Here, the player can choose to equip the camera, which stops the beauty from attacking Snake for the entire duration it is activated. Instead, she will begin to pose for photographs, which the player can take in whatever revealing or inappropriate manner they want, without repercussions. By re-equipping the camera, the player can make her switch poses, and by playing certain songs on the iPod, she will even dance for you. You also unlock achievements by doing so. When watching scenes of this nature, we need to ask questions such as if the people in the scene are being passive or active, and what kind of unequal power relations are created from this. In these cases, it is quite clear that the female characters are passive, while the male character, controlled by the player, is the one being active. In other words, the power is skewed in the direction of the player, while the female characters are sexualized for their gratification. These alternative scenes give the player the opportunity to completely strip these women from their agency at will, degrading them to little more than eye candy for a presumed male audience. At this very moment, these women are degraded to just their bodies, and might as well just be considered props at that point. There is no way to really get around the fact that this is here as pure objectification of the female body. In much the same way, another Easter egg lets the player interact with a female character's body without any repercussions. Rosemary is Snake's psychological counselor, who the player can call whenever they need to during the game. Once in a call with her, the player can make her breast jiggle and bounce by shaking the PlayStation 3 controller, something that is never acknowledged by Rose herself nor the other characters in the game. A huge part of the female cast in Metal Gear Solid 4 is, in other words, a perfect example of objectification in video games. While there is an attempt of painting over this with incomprehensive retroactive storylines, which you get after you murder them.
She's from a village in Scandinavia, little seaside hamlet known to all the locals as the Devil's Village.
The female characters are literally treated as bodies that exist for the purpose of pleasing others, in this case, the presumed male player. All of this could easily be shaken off by some for being from a rather old game. After all, a lot of change has taken place over the last 10 years. However, despite profound change in social expectations and gender roles, women are still disproportionately represented as sex objects in passive or supportive roles and as victims. As we continue forward, you will see that playing with female characters' agencies over their situation and their bodies is sadly a recurring theme in the Metal Gear Solid franchise. A few years later, in 2010, Metal Gear Solid Peace Walker was released for the PlayStation Vita. As per usual with Kojima-produced games, it was well received, both by reviewers as well as consumers. An unknown army of soldiers have occupied Costa Rica and established a nuclear warhead under the name Peace Walker. Big Boss and his own team of soldiers are tasked to put an end to this and save the country from a certain end. At some point, the player is introduced to Paz, a supposedly 16-year-old high school student from Costa Rica. She holds an important role in the game and is also part of a rather unusual side mission. There is a so-called extra ops mission under the name Date with Paz, where the player finds themselves on a beach where the only goal is to interact with Paz. You need to use the right words in order to make her happy, and by equipping the love box, Paz will ask if there is room for one more, and afterwards enter. the box will shake suggestively and she will make a final comment before the mission ends. Much like in Metal Gear Solid 4, the player can also equip the camera to make Paz pose for photographs, and playing a certain song will make her dance. It all sounds awfully familiar, doesn't it? In this case, I would say that Paz is not necessarily denied her agency from the get-go. However, that agency is being twisted for reasons that could be interpreted as oppressive. Instead of reducing her into a simple sex object, she is invited to consent and play along with scenarios that in reality could be seen as exploitative. It is not so much coercion as it is promoting certain behavior that in the end is there to please the male audience. It does get worse though, as there is more to this mission than it would first seem. Just like every other mission, the player is given a rank of their performance at the end of this extra ops. But not only that, as a reward for an S rank, Paz will be wearing only her underwear for subsequent playthroughs of the mission. Oh boy. This, of course, changes the context of the scene completely. It goes from arguably playful and silly to straight up objectification and denying of agency, of a supposed minor no less. The lack of clothing is literally a reward that serves as sexual gratification to the player at the expense of the character in question. Sexualization as a reward is not uncommon in media, and the emphasis on the appearance, beauty and sexuality of portrayed women usually come to the exclusion of other character traits. What character Paz might have had before this is thrown out the window in order to please the audience. To be fair though, you can also date Kaz in much the same way. It should be mentioned that in order to unlock this mission, you have to complete every single extra ops, which more so makes it into an obscure joke than anything else. Extra points to Peace Walker for the equal opportunity though, I suppose. Even though Kaz definitely deserves better too.
I misjudged you, Snake. Kaz, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. Come on! Kaz!
Let's move forward in time to the next numbered installment in the Metal Gear Solid franchise. In September 2015, Metal Gear Solid 5 The Phantom Pain was released to much the same critical success as its predecessors. Once again, the title was praised for its wonderful graphics, deep gameplay and superb storytelling. However, the development had been troubled, not least considering Hideo Kojima's internal feud with Konami before the game was even released. This resulted in what many consider to be a great, although in part unfinished, game. Big Boss, allegedly, awakens from a 9-year-long coma. Obvious foreshadowing music by David Bowie plays, and he then helps lead a mercenary group called the Diamond Dogs. It's all very much on the nose right here. While it all starts off as a simple revenge story, our protagonist soon discovers a sinister plot to create an entirely new model of Metal Gear, as is the way to do things in this universe. During your adventures, you will soon join forces with Quiet, a young woman with a knack for marksmanship. The character was, according to Kojima, made to appeal to cosplayers and sell figurines, which does explain a lot about her appearance and why she's being presented as obvious eye candy for the viewer. She is, however, despite this, without a doubt a strong and powerful character, arguably the best companion in the game. However, that does not really excuse her scantily clad presentation and the way she is purposely sexualized in an objectifying manner. As everyone already knows, according to the backstory, the reason Quiet is clothed this way is because she breathes through his skin. Now, we may argue if this is actually a good reason or not, but it is nonetheless a reason. Although some accepted this, I think it is safe to say that many took it more as an excuse to over-sexualize the only somewhat prominent heroine of the game rather than a genuine reason. Considering the amount of so-called fan service surrounding the creation of the character, as well as the many scenes she appears in, it is not hard to see why. In general, I think games media should have some credit for at least being a bit more critical about this one. Quiet is of course not alone in this depiction either. The women that we have already presented in this video are in many ways also capable on top of being sexualized, and this does not seem to be isolated to the games we are talking about. In the study Sexy, Strong and Secondary, which studied in-game content from 571 games released between 1983 and 2014, the researcher found that female characters who are sexualized also tend to be portrayed as capable. In fact, this pattern of coupling strength and sexualization of women in video games is so common that it has been labeled the Lara phenomenon, based on the character Lara Croft, star of the Tomb Raider series. There is of course the possibility that these strong depictions could have the positive effect of empowering female players. That is genuinely something to consider. However, I would agree with the researchers' assessment on this one when they say,
if female characters require sexualization to bolster their merit, that objectification and its deleterious outcomes, e.g. discomfort among women who do not play video games, become difficult to avoid.
According to their findings, games also depict secondary characters, such as the one we have talked about here, as more sexualized than primary characters. Since these characters are less important to the overall story and gameplay, one could conclude that video game developers might focus on physical appearance instead to make them more appealing to their audience. Hence the goal to sell figurines of half-naked women, I guess. However, basically reducing female characters in non-primary roles to their physical appearance and sexual attractiveness like this solidifies their status as secondary. They are not of the same importance as primary characters who are essential for driving the story forward. Now, Quiet does of course have some relevance to the narrative, however, her overall impact is small, and scenes she appears in more often than not place significance on her body and physical attributes. Add to that the fact that she cannot speak, and we have a character that literally can only interact with the narrative through her physical body. And then there is the reward, of course. When playing the game, the bond with companions can be increased, which makes them more comfortable around the player. By raising the bond level with Quiet to over 90%, she will be comfortable enough to do quite a few poses for the player when they are in the helicopter together. The player is now free to watch Quiet do her thing at her own leisure in between missions. Flaunting her body for your enjoyment is basically the ultimate endpoint for this character, and what is actually valued about her becomes rather clear. In fact, it fits perfectly as an example for objectification theory, under which the woman is treated as a body separated from a person, one that exists for the purpose of satisfying others. In this regard, objectification can be seen as a form of dehumanization. It is therefore notable that the only other companions with possible bond levels are a horse and a dog. I'm not saying this means anything in particular, of course. It is just kind of perfect for what we're talking about. With all that Kojima Productions knowledge in the back of our heads, we are now ready to go back to their latest game, Death Stranding, and talk about this punch. In the gameplay demonstration, this aggression is not unprovoked, of course. The player has to actively participate in the game for Sam to answer with violence. By zooming in on Sam's crotch several times repeatedly, the man soon gets enough and lets you know this by giving you a good old smack on the face. In a way, this makes sense, of course. It is inappropriate and rude to stare at people like that. It could even be called sexual harassment and objectifying.
Why are we still here? Just to suffer?
This is in stark contrast to Kojima Productions' previous games where, as we have shown, women tend to not have the same amount of agency over their bodies as male characters do. While Norman Reedus' character has enough control over the degrading situation to even break the fourth wall in order to punish the player's behavior, the female characters created by Kojima never seem to have that kind of luxury and instead has to perform sexually at the whim of the player. In other words, if these scenes were equal, Norman Reedus would be dancing or showing off his tight ass by now. Why isn't he dancing? This contrast of agency between gendered characters could also tell us something about how female sexuality is approached in video games, because looking over the catalog as we have, there are a few interpretations one could make. From what we have shown, it is not hard to make the interpretation that taking a cheeky look at the bodies of women is perfectly fine, but expressing the same interest toward a male coded body is not. Men's sexuality seems to be intentional, assumed even, and women's not so much. While women are generally portrayed in passive roles, men are more often depicted as active, strong, confident, and independent. Women pose, men fight back. And this could easily be seen as a manifestation of women's unequal power position to men. Now, the assumed audience for action games is generally heterosexual men, and all these games we have looked at, including Death Stranding, clearly don't seem to be exceptions. The female characters are presented in particular ways to appeal to heterosexual men, and sometimes their sexualization is even given as a reward. When the assumed heterosexual man playing the game then goes to stare at Norman Reedus' balls, he is hit in the face because of no homo, I suppose. And that is where it becomes a bit more complicated. What if you aren't the intended audience? If you look at this scene as any other person than one part of the intended audience, this punch becomes a bit more awkward. As a heterosexual cis woman approaching this the way men can with female characters from previously mentioned Kojima Productions games, your attraction towards this man is instead rejected with violence. Considering that men's violence against women is quite common and that the World Health Organization estimates that between 30 to 60% of all women in the world have been subjected to physical and/or sexual abuse at some point in their lifetime, this takes on a rather different tone. It is not just fun and games anymore, this is actually something very real. Homosexual men trying to interact with this scene on the same merits are likewise met with violence for expressing their sexuality in the game. And considering the intended audience being straight men, the punch here is easily interpreted as a negative outcome toward homosexual advances. Like we said before, the phrase no homo comes to mind. This treatment of man-on-man attraction can be connected to Connell's concept of
hegemonic masculinity.
This refers to the relation between cultural ideals of what it means to be a man and the dynamics of collective institutional power. This is the leading structural position, what men strive to be, so to speak, even if it might not be attainable in reality. In this instance, Norman Reedus could be said to be that kind of ideal boy. Other expressions of masculinity are in turn seen as subordinate to that which is hegemonic. The gay masculinity, for example, is seen as less than for not fitting into the hegemonic ideal, or as Connell puts it,
oppression positions homosexual masculinities at the bottom of a gender hierarchy among men.
From this point of view, the differences between gay masculinities and femininity seem to blur, and it is unsurprising then that gay men often face economic discrimination, exclusion, and, most importantly in this context, violence based on their sexuality. Male homophobia could actually be seen as a way for men to enact hegemonic boundaries in which they separate themselves from that which is beyond the traditional roles of men. In much the same way, trans people are seen as a threat toward this concept of manhood, and several reports paint a bleak picture of the violence committed in order to defend it. Not to be too long-winded, let's just say that this scene has quite a bit of subtext added if you look at this through the eyes of a trans person too. You see, all of this is actually tied to one simple thing. Masculinity is a rather fragile concept. Shocking but true. Men tend to display aggression and sometimes even violence when they feel their masculinity and manhood is being threatened by women or LGBT people. This is not naturally inherent to men, of course. It is through culture and socialization their identities have become precarious, something to be defended if threatened. After the rise of Gamergate, this fragility has been shown clearly in the world of video games as well. You have probably heard at least one of these before. Women are destroying our video games. Straight men are the most oppressed group. SJWs are taking away our sexy female characters. God forbid someone took pleasure in watching Norman Reedus' dick! Some may say that this is somewhat overanalyzing, but with the previous objectifying portrayals of women, the underlying context of who the intended audience for these games are, and the contrasting agency given to men and women here, I think it is a more than fair analysis. This interaction and the knowledge of similar interactions in previous Kojima Productions games tell us quite a bit about how gendered actions are treated unequal. It might even be a perfect example of it. To be fair, there is, however, another interpretation, if you so will, that is a bit more hopeful. If we try looking at this in a more positive light instead, there might be progress hidden here. Hopefully, this is not just the overtly apparent display of unequal power structures between men, women, and LGBT people as we have presented here. It could be that Kojima Productions have learned something from all their previous games, and that this punch is indeed a way to discourage players from inappropriate behaviors. Then I of course mean not only toward this particular character, but more to come. Hopefully, this means future female characters created by Kojima Productions likewise get the agency to fight back in these situations, rather than this just being a one-off goof. Only time will tell, of course. But considering their previous track record, we are not holding our breaths though.